Welcome to this Embarcadero Developer Skill Sprint, Migrating dbExpress applications to FireDAC. I'm David Intersimone, Vice President of Developer Relations and Chief Evangelist here at Embarcadero. There's my email address, davidi@embarcadero.com, and my Twitter handle, @davidi99. There are notes on a blog post. There's the short URL for it, sprint dbe to FireDAC with the hyphens, if you want to look at some of the links that I'll refer to in this skill sprint. This skill sprint works with RadStudio XE8 for VCL and FireMonkey projects. And it works with App Method April 2015 release for FireMonkey projects. And that's because App Method supports FireMonkey framework and FireDAC on all four platforms, Windows, OS X, Android, and iOS. RadStudio, Delphi, and C++ Builder also support VCL and FireDAC on Windows. In that case, then Windows only using RadStudio, Delphi, and C++ Builder. The Object Pascal language and C++ language can be used. So in this skill sprint, I'm going to talk about the dbExpress and FireDAC comparisons as it relates to the doc wiki for FireDAC, name and type counterparts between dbExpress and FireDAC, connection definitions, using the Refine tool to convert a Delphi sample app. In this case, we're going to use the included meeting organizer sample app that comes with XE8. There's a doc wiki all about migrating projects in general and specifically about migrating dbExpress applications to FireDAC. And you can find that online. Here we are in the FireDAC doc wiki, and you'll notice there's a lot of information about building FireDAC applications. And in one link specifically, migrating to FireDAC. And on the migrating to FireDAC page, you'll notice there's help for migrating your BDE applications. I covered that last quarter in a skill sprint. Migrating dbExpress applications to FireDAC, and migrating AnyDAC, the previous releases of FireDAC. So let's take a look at the landing page for migrating dbExpress applications to FireDAC. There's some general overview information that talks about dbExpress as it relates to its DBMS client libraries and their use inside of your applications. And FireDAC, which just uses the physical driver link for the specific SQL database you want to talk to. There's also some discussion about SQL query, SQL store procedure, table processing. All dbExpress datasets are unidirectional. Combining dbExpress dataset with dataset provider and client dataset gave you that bidirectional and advanced client-side capabilities. FireDAC datasets are bidirectional with advanced client-side capabilities. There's also pages here for name counterparts between dbExpress and FireDAC and connection migration. We'll just look at those real quickly. You can look at them yourself. So the name of the connection is SQL connection in dbExpress. It's FD connection in FireDAC. T-SQL query, TFD query. T-SQL stored proc, TFD stored proc, T-SQL table, TFD table, and so on. So there's a one-for-one relationship for most of the components and names between dbExpress and FireDAC. As far as connection migration, dbExpress has its names for the driver interfaces for different databases. Interbase was spelled out, Firebird was spelled out, and so on. On FireDAC, it's IB and FB. Oracle on dbExpress, Aura, SQLite. So you can take a look at this page for the naming conventions for your driver names and the corresponding FireDAC connections. Also, there's different parameters. Some aren't applicable in FireDAC because it does some things under the covers for you. You can look again at the parameter lists here, blob sizes, database name, is whether it's encrypted, host name, and so on, and then what the FireDAC parameter name is. And so there's a lot of help and information for you on this page. There's an additional dbExpress migration hints page, which just talks about looking at some of the components in dbExpress and some things you'll need to do in FireDAC. Exception handling is different. On FireDAC, there's a wait cursor that you'll need to put in your application. We'll see that in action here in just a moment. And then additional information about creating connections, connecting to the database, logging into the database, and so on. So you can go and look at all of that on the doc wiki. And then for application migration, there's some steps and there's some utilities that come with exe8 that you can use to migrate your applications. And then this is the blog page that Brian created with the starting links, and we'll update these links over the next couple days based on feedback that we get from you in the question section of this skill sprint, and if you send me any emails along the way. So let's go and look at what it takes to migrate an application. exe8 comes with a meeting organizer sample application that's built in dbExpress, and we're going to use the utilities and tools to migrate that to a FireDAC application. Let me switch over to my computer running Windows 10, and we'll take a look at what we have to do to migrate this dbExpress application to FireDAC. So here I am with Rad Studio exe8 loaded. It's running in the Insider preview of Windows 10, and I'll bring up Windows Explorer just to get us oriented to the demo and the example. So in the user public documents, Embarcadero Studio 16, samples, Object Pascal database, FireDAC, tool refined, dbx to FD migration folder, you'll see a script text file for the refine tool called FireDAC Migrate dbX. Let's go and open this up in the editor. And this file contains a whole host of commands for the refined utility to migrate both form files and source code in your project. So for example, if it sees a dbx interface unit being used, that gets converted to firedac.phys.ib. When it sees some code, for example, transaction isolation, then it will set the right generic types that you need in your application. And we can go on and on looking for different kinds of properties and fields being accessed, and it just removes some of those. If you're in the doc wiki, you'll see that those were not applicable. So if it finds those in your code, your forms, it'll remove it. Here we're going to go and process different commands: a SQL connection, T-SQL connection in dbExpress versus TFD connection. We're going to take any query data sources, param checks, any statements, data source, and so on, and convert those. And so here's SQL table. If it sees a T-SQL table, it becomes TFD table, and so on. So that's the template text file that'll be used to migrate your application. Then we'll go into the demo folder. The demo folder contains a database for the meeting organizer. It also contains the project. It's in the forms subdirectory. And here's my project file. Here's the form file and the source code unit for each of the files for the data module, for the input forms of this meeting organizer application you'll see in a moment. So lots of different form files and unit files. It also contains this migrate bat file. And the migrate bat file will create a FireDAC subdirectory. So after it copies the source code files over, it'll run the refined utility, converting any source code units, VCL form files, FireMonkey form files that it finds, and then it will use that FireDAC migrate dbx text file with all those patterns to do the conversions of the form files and the source code files. We'll run this migrate batch file, and it copies all the files over to this new directory, which is the same name of the directory, but with FireDAC stuck on the front. And now it's going through each of the source files and form files that it finds in that subdirectory, and it's modifying them. So this batch file will run for a while. And again, under the covers, it's running the refined utility. Now it's complete. If we go into the form subdirectory, we'll notice that we have a FireDAC meeting org, and this has the same source files, but now these Pascal files and DFM files have been updated. So let's first go and open the meeting organizer that uses dbExpress. This was the sample. Let's bring up the data module. It's got a SQL connection component. That's the dbExpress SQL connection component. It's got a connection name, MO. It's got some parameters down here to get to the different drivers and so on for dbExpress. The database I've copied over to the subdirectory called data, and there's the interbase file. Also in the Data Explorer, if I go to dbExpress under interbase, I've got this MO table database, and we can look at the tables that are associated. So let's just compile and run this example. And this is the dbExpress version. I can log in and I can go in and see users. There's only one user right now that's defined for users. I can go and look at rooms. There's one room defined, but we could add additional rooms with capacity, the location, the name of that room. If I'm a meeting manager, I can create a meeting ID, select all the users, and select the room that is going to be used. A nice little application that is running in dbExpress. Let's now close this project, and let's go and open up the FireDAC version. Here's FireDAC meeting org. There's the project file. So now we've got the same user interface, the same components, the same menus, and so on. And then let's go and look at the data module. It kept the name SQL connection, but notice now it's using a TFD connection component. The connection name is MO. If I use the tools FireDAC Explorer menu item, you'll see that I've got a connection definition for that string MO meeting organizer. I set the database name, the username and password, and I can go and test it and make sure it's all okay. Same thing over here in the Data Explorer. I can go under Interbase, and I've got the meeting organizer table. I can go and modify it and test the connection and so on if we move the database somewhere else, for example. So it's all good. Let's go back and look at a meetings data module. Now notice that what were dbExpress components before for doing SQL queries are now converted to TFD queries on the form with all the right settings and so on. There's a couple extra things I need to make sure that I've done. I already told you that we needed to create a FireDAC connection or set up the FD connections parameters so that it points to the database. There's some code in this main data module that was specific to dbExpress, and this was load params from INI file. So that code I need to comment out. And there might be some other dbExpress specific code that the Refine utility can't really deal with as a pattern. But I'm going to use the FireDAC FD connection INI file to manage my connections. If you wanted to have an INI file for your FireDAC connection, then you could load that INI file and set the right parameters. FireDAC uses a component called a wait cursor. While a query is happening, you can control what the cursor looks like. So we need to go and add a wait cursor to our application and set for the wait cursor for the graphical user interface. This is a VCL application, so you have your choices of console if it's a console app, FMX if it's a FireMonkey app, or Forms if it's a VCL app. Once we've done that, then I can compile and run this FireDAC version, log in with my user account, go and look at the users. There's a user. Then we go over to the rooms, and for example, let's add a new room. So this is maybe 500 people, and it's a lower lobby, and it's called Redwood. And let's go and post that, and then go back and look at the rooms, and we've got a couple of rooms loaded. Here's our same application, same user interface, in this case a VCL app, but it works just as well with a FireMonkey app that was using dbExpress. So if you're using standard dbExpress components, standard settings, it'll be an automatic conversion. Just add the wait cursor, set up your FireDAC connection, and you're done. If you're using more code and specialty parts of dbExpress in your application, then you'll want to take a look at the doc wiki and the additional hints and help to understand some of those issues. But otherwise, type for type compatibility. FireDAC does a lot of the work under the covers for you with bidirectional updates. You could, of course, set cached updates, and you can extend your application with the power of FireDAC if you want in the future once you get your application migrated over. And FireDAC is the future, not only on Windows with VCL, but it's the future in moving your applications to multi-device environments. You could use the Meta converter, for example, to convert the VCL forms to FireMonkey forms and then go from there. So as I mentioned on the blog for this skill sprint, the short URL is down there at the bottom. We've got some links to the doc wiki and dbExpress to FireDAC migration pages that are available for you. There's this sample for migrating that meeting organizer VCL dbExpress application to FireDAC. You've got that FireDAC for Object Pascal template file, that text file that the refined utility uses. You could look through that text file, and if you have a C++ project, you could make the subtle changes instead of using the dot notation, using the arrow notation, and so on. The form files will just convert over very nicely. Next time, Marco Cantu is going to present proximity awareness with beacons using the new tBeacon component that's in Exe8 and App Method Spring 2015. That's next Tuesday, June 23rd at 6 a.m., 11 a.m., and 5 p.m. We've got some great offers until the end of this month, to the end of June. There's a buy one, get one free. Get your Exe8 and get another tool of equal or lesser value for free. You also have the 10% introductory special offer. We encourage you to add update subscription to your purchase. If you already have Exe8 and you want to add update subscription, contact our sales office. If you've got older versions that aren't available for upgrade pricing, you can purchase the license and add update subscription, and you'll get the upgrade price. So all of those offers are good until the end of this month. We also have the bonus pack, which contains the VCL and FireMonkey premium styles. And we've also added new Windows 10 VCL and FireMonkey styles that you can download as well from your registered user download area. The Object Pascal Handbook by Marco Cantu, he's constantly updating that. And we have the latest release of that up in the registered user download area. And we've also added the Media Converter Basic Edition for Rad Studio Exe8, Delphi, and C++ Builder that allows you to migrate your VCL applications to FireMonkey applications. You can get all the details and the terms and conditions at the Embarcadero.com/rad offer page. And now I'll open it up for Q&A. The blog notes short URL is down there at the bottom. There's my email address and my Twitter handle. You can use the question area of the GoToWebinar control panel and put your questions in. And I'm happy to take them and provide the answers or follow up if I need to. Thanks for joining me on this developer skill sprint.
Okay, Alf had reported he was having some issue with an Oracle number field and converting it or being able to use it with an int64. And after researching a little bit, I put in a link to his question about there's a FireDAC page for setting options on the FireDAC wiki. There's a format options option, and there it actually talks about an example using an Oracle number column and how to map it to a BCD or even to an int64. And it just mentions that for more details, read data type mapping. There's a link for data type mapping in FireDAC. So hopefully that will help you. And Kenneth had a great suggestion. He manually creates the weight cursor so we can flip it to console using an include file for DUnit testing. Yeah, I think great things, great suggestion, Kenneth, for what to do about the FireDAC weight cursor, GUI weight cursor, and console is a good one that just says there's no user interface. Console is great for if you're building web apps, console app services, and other things that might need to use FireDAC. Good suggestion. Let's see. David is saying, using DBX to connect to Microsoft SQL Server, used to configure vendor lib, SQL IB, so don't need to install anything to connect the DB. So for FireDAC, you don't need, so in dbExpress had its own driver files that you had to carry along with you, its driver interface DLLs that you had to carry along with you. FireDAC doesn't have any of that. You have that physical link component, and the physical link component brings in runtime library code that's linked into your application, and that does the physical connection to the SQL Server native client or any database native client, Interbase, Firebird, and so on. So that's one of the nice capabilities of using FireDAC versus dbExpress. You only have your application. Now, that said, with your application, you'll still need to have the SQL, either local or remote SQL client interfaces from the vendors, Microsoft, Oracle, and so on, so that FireDAC can find them at runtime and talk through them to get to your local or remote database. That's separate if you're using Interbase Lite or Interbase to Go. Those are static libraries that can be linked into your executables if you're talking specifically with Interbase. But you don't need to do any, there's no dbExpress style DLL libraries for interfacing to the SQL clients. Ludo was asking, does C++ Builder support the iOS simulator? No, it doesn't. Simulator is only supported for Delphi. Fishwa is asking, is FireDAC now the preferred method for DB access over anything else? Yes, FireDAC is what we're spending and focusing all our efforts on. The BDE has been deprecated. dbExpress is being supported but not being enhanced. FireDAC is getting all the attention. The great thing about FireDAC is that it supports newer backend databases, more capabilities, and is available on all the platforms that we support. So Windows, OS X, iOS, and Android. FireDAC is the future. Let's see, Moro's asking, when I redistribute my app with FireDAC, I must redistribute or install a client to connect to database. In order to access a SQL database, unless somehow the vendor gives you some kind of static library for accessing, you need to have that, whatever it is for Microsoft, SQL client, DLL installed somewhere, MySQL installed somewhere on your machine to have those drivers. But as far as your app is concerned, your app using FireDAC is is a monolithic executable, or it's a combination of executables and DLLs, whatever your type of software architecture you're building for your app. But you still have to, except in the case of Interbase Lite and Interbase to Go, you still have to have some mechanism provided by your SQL database provider for getting to the database. So in Oracle, you install the Oracle client, and that sits on your machine, and it's got its code that sits there, even if the Oracle database is running on a Linux server or wherever. Why is the wait cursor this important? It's part of the architecture of FireDAC. We're having conversations about should the wait cursor just be automatically included and that you don't have to drop it down. FireDAC will now create, I think it was in XE7 and later, for the physical link, that will get included under the covers for you. The wait cursor still needs to be dropped down for now. And so that's just something that's being looked at, whether the wait cursor should automatically include it based on the type of application you're building, if you're building a FireMonkey application or a VCL application. So that's just the way it's architected currently, so that you can, and it's tied into you being able to control what you want to do for the user for long-running queries, for example, what user interface cursor you might want to give to your users to let them know something is still going on.
Carl asked, can you use FireDAC for DataSnap servers? And I answered yes. You can use FireDAC in DataSnap servers, EMS servers, SOAP servers, REST servers, web servers, console apps, Windows VCL apps, FireMonkey, Windows, OS X, iOS, and Android apps, and anywhere else where you build functionality in Delphi and C++ Builder, you can use FireDAC. Thomas said, thanks, very interesting and useful. I hope my apps will convert also that easy. And I just want to comment that you should definitely read the DocWiki docs in advance, especially the documents on dbExpress migration hints and the overview, which has some tips along the way. So just to make sure you look at some of the issues, take a look at the field options as well in FireDAC. If you're, depending on which database you're using, it might have a data type that you need to map to a Delphi or C++ data type. There may be some issues there in the field data types, but that's all doable. Just look for field options on the FD connection component. And also, if any of you go through and use the migration tool on your Delphi apps, we're still trying to figure out what to do about C++ apps. The only little tricky part is, besides the different notation between the two languages, is that we need to process the header file, which is associated with a form, whereas in Delphi or Object Pascal, we have the form and the underlying unit. We don't have this additional file that we have to process. So I have to look at that. But then send me an email if it works for you, or if you found some things that weren't working in the migration, or that you had to do some hand work that wasn't listed. We can get that to our doc team, and they can update the migration documentation to help everybody else if there's things that you saw. Let's see. Larry's asking, with the VCL to FireMonkey converter tool, how much does it convert? What happens to third-party tools in the process? So it'll convert your standard VCL applications and the form files to FireDAC. It'll also, for data-aware controls that you might have, it'll create the live bindings for you. There's that's the Media Converter Basic. There's also Media Converter Studio, which is a paid version you can upgrade to. And that does a little bit more source code handling. It supports a certain number of third-party components that it knows about. So go to MediaConverter.com. Let me do that. Go to www. If I can type that, MediaConverter.com. If I can type here, which I can't. And you'll see what also is available beyond the basic edition that we have bundled in as part of the bonus pack. So MediaConverter.com, you'll see more product information and what it does for other third-party components. So. But it won't convert everything, but it'll tell you what it can and cannot convert. There's a log file that gets generated as part of the conversion process. Let's see. Has anyone measured the speed of FireDAC versus other database access systems? We haven't done any benchmarks. We've found that we've gotten some feedback from developers that it's faster than the BDE, it's faster than dbExpress, it's faster than dbGo ADO. But then again, if you've got some database that isn't supported by FireDAC, but you have ODBC, we have the FireDAC to ODBC bridge. Some people have said field processing is about 30% faster in exe8 if you're working with fields. Let's see. But if somebody out there has some tests that they've been running versus other database access systems, we did a lot of research several years ago as part of the acquisition process for AnyDAC, which became FireDAC, where we compared it with a whole bunch of different candidate possibilities, including some internal technology we had, and it was the best at that time. But if you have some information, send me an email, and I'll pass it along to the team, and then they'll just optimize the heck out of whatever somebody says is not fast enough, if it's humanly possible. Otherwise, it's something happening on the database side, and then use the usual SQL database tricks on the server side. Is there a refine script included for ADO dbGo projects? No, not that I'm aware of. The three migrations areas are BDE applications, dbExpress applications, and then AnyDAC. If you have some older AnyDAC applications, then There's a refine script for those. There's also a refine script for FireDAC XE7 to FireDAC XE8, but I'll pass along. Yet. What someone could do, though, is it's just a text file, so you could take the DBX to FireDAC or the BDE to FireDAC refine script file, and you can edit that. It's just a text file, and you could create your own. To be a great exercise for someone to do is go in and edit those text entries, and compare dbExpress component names and method names, for example, versus dbGo for ADO, T-ADO connection, I guess, to TFD connection. So you could do that yourself. Let's see. But if there isn't anything yet, I'll pass that along and see if somebody wants to do that. Maybe we get an MVP, or maybe one of you could do that. Okay. Vladislav asks, FireDAC, Postgres, and Android, is that possible? So all the FireDAC support for databases is listed on the database connectivity. So I'll put in a link to that DocWiki. There's a breakdown of the different, and there is Postgres, and FireDAC is available. There's that question of whether or not where the database exists. If it's a remote database, then you need to use some mobile through some middle tier of some kind, through SOAP service, REST service, EMS server, DataSnap server, or so on, or your own. We support SQLite on mobile and IB Lite, IB2Go on mobile, where the database and in your FireDAC app can be on the same machine, on the same device, to talk to a database on the same device. I'm not sure about Postgres native on Android locally. Some people have talked about MySQL, so we have to do some research there. Maybe there's a MySQL client and database you can put on a mobile device, but you can go from FireDAC on mobile via remoting through, for example, again through DataSnap or REST or EMS, and use the FD schema adapter component. We covered all of that in the FireDAC skill sprints in Q1 in the January through March, so you can go back and look at how the FD schema adapter is used, or you can search the DocWiki for FD schema adapter. And what it does is it brings JSON over from the server side to the client side, and then you can just do an update, and it will send table and master detail, send the updated JSON back, and then FireDAC on the server side will send the updates to the correct tables of your database. And yes, FireDAC works just fine for multi-tier, and you can use, yes, it works. You can use client data set if you want to, but FireDAC includes TFD mem table for local storage and offline or disconnected storage. And it has its own binary format. It can store XML, JSON as well. So you don't need Midas, no DLLs or anything else. You can use FD mem table. The only reason you would need the Midas technology is if you were using client data set. But check out TFD mem table. Andrew's asking, faster than TurboDB? Don't know. FireDAC is not as fast as Interbase TIB query. Well, IBX, we'll have to look. I'll have to look again at XE8 because there's been improvements in XE8 in the Interbase implementations between FireDAC and Interbase in certain areas, and also support for things like IB, XE, Interbase, XE7, change views, and so on. The Interbase Express components go direct to the API level of Interbase, and that's why some people choose that are committed to using Interbase, they use the Interbase Express components like TIB query and TIB table and TIB connection and so on. I guess I've got a bunch of IBX-based applications and FireDAC-based applications. So I guess I'll have to come up with some kind of SQL query test case and run a bunch of queries and see which one's faster. FireDAC does have a batch operation command, and there is a skill sprint for batch operations. And so I suspect that if you batched all the queries together into a batch with FireDAC, it might be faster than doing individual TIB query calls. So you might check out the FireDAC batch skill sprint that took place in Q1. TFD mem table is covered. So if you just go back to the skill sprint landing page, I'll go. Oh yeah, Array DML. That was the one I was thinking of. Yeah. Again, thank you for these great questions. All right, everyone. It's always fun having you online and being able to spend some time with you. This is all cool stuff I get to play with. As always, I'm the kid in the candy store. Last Saturday was my birthday. I'm only 64. And tomorrow will be my 30th year here working with these developer tools. So I guess I've learned a little bit, but I'm still learning a lot more, and you're all challenging me by asking me good questions and telling us to do more, and I love that as well. So have a great day. Bye.